Robo-Robotnik has taken over as the new main antagonist of Sonic's universe, and he's taken on a much more modern Eggman appearance. We're going to be fast forwarding a little bit, but here are some cliff notes of anything of interest that might have happened along the way. Robo-Robotnik would actually bring back the original Robotnik. This version of Robotnik would run off to find Sonic to get some help, and he'd actually be accepted into the gang. But whoops, turns out that, of course, he's evil. This whole plot would be overall very silly, and it would culminate with, unsurprisingly, the two Robotniks turning against one another. We'd learn that Dr. Quack found out that this Robotnik's molecules were unstable, and so during a fight between the two Robotniks, this Robotnik would fade out into nothingness. This brings to an end the original Robotnik, and it makes me wonder what the point of any of this was, because it seems to kind of take away from anything that we saw with the original Robotnik dying. Now that the new Robotnik is a robot and not a human, it's also alright to blow him up. Sonic would later confront this Robotnik, where he would botch the "You shall not pass" line from Lord of the Rings, and ultimately, he would blow up Robotnik with some missiles. However, this wouldn't be enough to put a stop to the Doctor, as he would later come back as whatever this weird looking thing is. It doesn't really matter because he still wasn't immune to explosives, and once again, he went boom, this time with a stick of dynamite. So here's the thing, I find that an enemy like this is really boring, because there are no stakes here. Sure, we know that no one in comics really dies, and I mean for sure, especially in a comic like Archie Sonic, they're not going to be murdering someone on screen. But when you have a villain that you can't guarantee will be gone after being blown up multiple times, it gets a little bit old. I'm gonna be honest with you, nothing really happens here, so we're gonna skip ahead and get moving. Robotnik would end up roboticizing himself and Snively, and I know I said before that the dark blue look of Robo-Robotnik looked pretty dumb, but I have to say, I hate this look even more. I hate it so much. Why does he have holes at the ends of his fingers? It doesn't really matter, because aliens would abduct Sonic, Tails, Robotnik, and Snively. And while abducted, the aliens would experiment on them. They would swap them around and create Mecha Sonic and Mecha Tails, and they would return Robotnik and his nephew into humans. But here's the thing, and I just need to pause for a second. Story-wise, this makes zero sense to me. We've seen that Robotnik has been body hopping into other mech bodies. None of these were his original Robo-Robotnik bodies. And if you remember from the previous video, Robo-Robotnik is a roboticized Robotnik from another universe. So I guess these aliens have the power to turn machines into flesh, because that's the only way that this would actually make any sense to me. But honestly, it's one of those things where it's probably best if you just don't think about it and accept that this is now a fleshy Robotnik. The story would end with the two new mech boys beating the fleshy boys, and so the aliens would turn them all into flesh. I don't get it either. None of this made any sense, but Robotnik is now not a robot. Now, speaking of things I don't get, the Eggman name seems to just kind of come out of nowhere. In issue 130, both Sonic and the President call this guy Dr. Robotnik, and that's a combo of words I never thought I would put together. Then, 2 issues later, Sonic would see the Doctor. He would call him Eggman, but Eggman's daughter/creation thing, M, which honestly is just way too much for me to get into in one video, would call him Robotnik. Sonic would also call him Robotnik, like calling him a butt. So I don't actually know which name they're sticking with or where Eggman really came from. I can't seem to find anything. If you can, then please let me know. But just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to be calling him Eggman going forward. And with that, let's skip past all the goofy silliness and go ahead to what is considered to be one of the best Eggman stories. Now, this is one of my favorite Sonic stories of all time, not just in Archie Sonic comics, but in any Sonic video game or otherwise. We'd have a pretty familiar setup here. Sonic would be facing off against the Doctor, and he's in this very cool looking spider bot. Of course, after some banter, the two would fight, and it would quickly change from here. Eggman would grow in frustration and slowly become less intelligible. He would even begin to order Sonic to stop. The more this fight would progress, the further Eggman would delve into madness. Then, finally, Sonic would tear through the Doctor's mech. Eggman would absolutely snap here. This panel where Eggman yells out Hedgehog is so powerful to me. The spittle flying from his mouth and the fact that he looks like he's crying just exemplifies that this man is thoroughly broken. Through not only this video, but basically every single Sonic video I've ever made that Eggman has been involved in, Sonic has beaten him time and time again. Heck, it's only been a few minutes into this video and we've already seen it happen a handful of times. Of course, this man would go insane after being beaten down so many times by the same blue hedgehog. Eggman would scream out in absolute frustration and cause genuine shock to Sonic. Eggman would tear his mustache off, and in a last-ditch attempt, he would frantically swing at Sonic before falling on the ground yelling at himself. Even Sally would be shocked at this and ask Sonic what he had done, but Sonic wouldn't have more of an explanation aside from the fact that he just beat him like any other time. Snively would interject here and say that Sonic didn't just beat Eggman, he broke him. Snively has explained that after a decade of fighting Sonic and being destroyed over and over again, Eggman's mind has just deteriorated to this. He asks only that they leave him to care for his uncle. This whole thing is crazy, and Sonic is left in shock as he's clearly rattled by all this. Battling Eggman has been part of the deal for years, and so who could blame him that he never expected things to end like this? Sure, Eggman was a villain, but did he deserve to have his mind so thoroughly broken? The gang would head off and leave Eggman in Snively's care. It's here that, unsurprisingly of course, we'd learn that Snively is just as mad as his uncle. He'd leave the mentally broken Eggman in a padded cell and introduce the Dark Legion, which is Eggman's army, to a new leader. And of course, it's Snively's girlfriend, the Iron Queen. You go, Short King. Snively and his boo would rule together for a time, but this isn't a Snively video, and we know that Eggman isn't going to be gone for long. Snively would end up bragging to his uncle about how well things are going since he's taken over. And although the doctor would be speaking in mostly gibberish, once Snively was gone, he would eventually give the cell block override code and set himself free. Snively would of course return to investigate the noise that came from the cell door unlocking, and it's here that a less mentally broken, but still quite fragmented, Eggman would escape from his prison cell. I just love how they write his dialogue here, with words like Snively that just really capture this creepy slurring vibe that he's got going from him as a mentally destroyed man. Before Snively could even stop his uncle, Eggman would escape in a mecha tortoise, and in this robotic reptilian, the former Robotnik would be out for revenge. Or, as he would put it, he's the Warlord Dr. Julian Ivo Eggman Robo Kintobor Mach 2. And I find this really funny because it sounds like insane rambling, but also it manages to thoroughly encapsulate everything that we've seen since the last Robotnik video. Eventually, Sonic would find this tortoise tearing up trees in hopes of finding the entrance to Knothole. And so, of course, like any other time, a fight would commence between the two. Thankfully, Tails would swing by and he'd manage to disable the robot tortoise. Even Sonic just feels bad for Eggman at this point, but Tails doesn't totally understand the sympathy for this broken doctor. Despite this, he agrees that they can take Eggman in a non-cruel way. Eggman would then punch Sonic the moment that Sonic tried to help him out. This would cause so much joy to come to Eggman that he would begin laughing so hard that he would fall out of his mech and onto the ground, where Sonic would have to give him to Tails to bring back home. Back at home in a detention center, Sonic would go talk to the doctor, who would initially mistake him for his Uncle Charles, or Chuck. Eggman would find himself stuck in the past as he would discuss the Great War and Sonic's father, whom he roboticized. Eventually, some lucidity would return, but only for a moment before returning to the Great War mentality. This time back to when he had defected from the Overlanders and just before he had met King Max. The gang wouldn't have time to work on figuring out Eggman's fractured psyche as the Iron Queen would come with the Dark Egg Legion. Together, they would manage to hack Nicole, who is the AI that protects the Mobian city, and she would instruct the newly hacked Nicole to disable the shields in order to let the Dark Egg Legion in. Through all this chaos, Sonic and friends would rush to save the day, and they would actually nearly get trapped within the city as massive walls would come in and enclose them like a massive metal dome. Inside, Snively would find his uncle and gloat about how he managed to succeed on taking over where Eggman couldn't. Unfortunately, Eggman's mind is once again lost, and his massive monologue would fall on deaf ears. With the city taken over, Snively would place Sonic's Uncle Chuck in a detention cell. On his way there, Chuck would see Eggman, who was still stuck in the past. It wasn't until after Charles called him Eggman that things began to fall into place. Like puzzle pieces, it all began to come together, and suddenly, Eggman remembered everything. Finally, Eggman would don on his glasses once again, and there would be hell to pay. A cocky Snively would saunter towards Eggman, bragging about how he was once afraid of him. That would return now that Eggman's mind is back. Eggman would explain to a terrified Snively that he sees it all. The reason why he's lost time and time again against Sonic isn't due to the fact that Sonic is smarter than him. It's due to the fact that Sonic is full of unpredictability. The chaos energy that Sonic has been using literally runs through him, and that has been the main factor working against the Doctor, because nobody can prepare for chaos. Eggman says, though, that now that he's lost his mind and he's seen chaos, he can handle Sonic if he's let out, but Snively would just laugh here in his face. Snively wouldn't be dumb enough to let his uncle out now that he's gained all of this power and he's got this girlfriend. Although after hearing this, it's Eggman's turn to laugh. He would mock Snively for his love and explain that Snively is being used and that he is just a simple coward who would run for his own good once the going gets tough. Snively would storm out with tears in his eyes as Eggman just laughed at him, knowing that he'll be back to let him out. And sure enough, as Eggman predicted, once the Dark Egg Legion began to lose ground, Snively would come running back for his uncle. The cowardly sidekick would leave his army and his love interest behind to be taken into custody due to his incompetence as a leader. With that, Eggman was back, and more insane than ever. Eggman would go into hiding for a time in order to rebuild and re-establish his dominance. During this time, he would begin to break Snively. He would force him to renounce his love to Regina, that's the Iron Queen by the way, and in doing so, he would create a new enemy in his nephew, an enemy that Eggman would effectively end up killing in the future. Finally, once he was ready, Eggman would return in a new Death Egg. And because this is starting to cover ground that we've already seen in a previous video, which was the Mecha Sally video, I'm not going to linger for too long. However, I do suggest that you check out both the Mecha Sally video and the video where Eggman kills Snively, because I think they're really interesting and I'm not going to be delving too deep into either of them in this video. So, Sonic and Sally would assault the Death Egg. While on board, they would come across a strange chamber, and in that chamber, they would meet a new and improved Silver Sonic. Sonic would be ecstatic to fight against this new upgraded foe, and this would cause a good deal of frustration to Sally, who just wants to continue their mission. Sally would eventually just have to continue on her own, and it's in doing this that she would come face to face with a hidden wall turret. Lacking Sonic's speed, she would die here. This is dark, like really dark. With Sally dead, Eggman would toast a glass of champagne and press a big red button. This would cause everything to be erased into white nothingness. Sonic would scream out Sally's name as he realized what had happened, but it would be too late as the white void would consume him and everything around him. Sonic would find himself in a new world, one that much closer resembled the classic Sonic side-scroller from the Genesis games. Here he would once again meet his friends. However, none of them have any memories of the past, and so effectively, this is their first time meeting. They would also meet Snively, and of course, eventually they would meet Eggman, who has gone through a bit of a physical change to resemble his video game counterpart. In this new world, Snively and Eggman would once again build their Death Egg, and prime it for Phase 2 of their plan. Although both of them seem a little bit foggy as to what Phase 2 is, but it for sure lies with rewriting the world in their own vision. Now, Sonic would end up getting onto the Death Egg, and once he faced off against Eggman, his memories of the previous universe would come back to him. The two would duke it out, and Sonic would use some of the power cables that had split open to turn himself into Super Sonic. And then he would go on to use Chaos Control to once again reset the universe to how it was. It's actually pretty sweet at the end of this, watching Sonic from space wishing goodbye to Sally and watching Sally regain her memories and remember all of this. Also kind of wild to remember that you died in a previous universe. Thanks to Sonic's Chaos Control, he now managed to rewind to the moment before Sally died. Using his knowledge, Sonic would rush in and save Sally from being killed, and the two would give Silver Sonic the slip, getting him shot by the wall turret that was once set for Sally. Meanwhile, Eggman's button would now do nothing, which would cause him to lose his temper pretty quickly. For a brief moment, Eggman would snap once again. Then he would just compose himself and continue to head off on his mission. Honestly, chill Eggman is almost scarier than insane Eggman. Meanwhile, Sally and Sonic learn that Eggman has built a world roboticizer, which, of course, exists to roboticize the world. This new roboticizer would not only build Eggman an army, but it would also blow up anything electric. This means that Gun, the military on the planet, would be destroyed. Sonic's dad, Nicole, Bunny, they would all be dead. But also, as Sally would point out, Eggman's Dark Egg Legion, who are all cyborgs just like Bunny, would also be gone. However, this doesn't bother Eggman, as instead he'll be left with an army of robot slaves. The duo would spring into action to try and stop the Mad Doctor, but Sonic would be disrupted by both Metal and Silver Sonic, who actually managed to survive the blasting. With Sonic keeping most of the attention, Sally would disappear and try to stop this. Sonic would not only have to juggle the two mechanical doppelgangers, but also Eggman, who has a myriad of guns, though most of Eggman's arsenal would be pretty quickly destroyed. While Sonic is doing this, Sally would be under the floorboards trying to hack into the system in order to stop this roboticizer before it could start. Sadly though, she would learn that they don't have enough time to do this, and that the only option would be for Sally to reverse the roboticizer onto the point where she is right now. This would destroy the Death Egg. However, it would also specifically target Sally directly. Sally, without a moment to spare, would gladly sacrifice herself. She remembers that she's been given a second chance, and she thinks about the good times she's had with Sonic before shedding a tear, and then she activates the device. The Death Egg would then go kathoom, and once again, the Mad Doctor has lost. Or has he? Sonic would gloat about his victory after emerging from the rubble, and Eggman would try once again to have one final stand head-on until he's quickly defeated. Except a mechanical fist would emerge from the rubble, and yeah, it's Mecha Sally. This has been a really fun start, and without me getting too repetitious, we're just gonna kind of hit the cliff notes and then skip ahead. Eggman would command Mecha Sally to drop Sonic from the Death Egg, and it's from here that the Mecha Sally arc would begin. She would work as essentially Eggman's robotic slave for the remainder of the comic before it hit a soft reboot. So let's talk about that soft reboot. Essentially, what ended up happening is, due to legal complications with former head writer Ken Penders, Sonic's world would be entirely reset, with a whole bunch of characters being removed and essentially things being rebooted. So how exactly did this happen? Well, Sonic would meet Mega Man, and the two heroes would go on a fight together. They would then super bro fist each other, and after doing this, they would reset the universe. That's actually what happens. I'm not making any of that up. Now, in this new universe, Eggman would crash land into some empty plains, and it's here that he would meet Axel the Water Buffalo. This is the first of his deadly 12 Egg Bosses. The Egg Bosses effectively serve to replace the Dark Egg Legion. They're the new leaders of Eggman's army, and there's some really cool ones here. I quite like Cassia and Clove. I also think Tundra, who is Rotor's dad, makes a really cool Egg Boss. If you're curious about learning about them, again, I have a video about them. Shameless plugs all around today. Now here's the thing, in this new rebooted universe, there is one more arc that's called the Shattered Worlds arc, and I have had a video planned on this arc for a long time. I realized that while I'm writing this, that if I tried to cover it in this video, I would not be able to do it justice, because this video is already getting quite long, and I wouldn't want to stretch it too long on this arc, as Eggman does play an important role in it, but he doesn't play a major factor throughout the entire video. And so I think that because of this, to give this arc proper justice and do it on its own, that this is a good spot to end the video. Because for the most part, we have covered every single major element that has happened in Eggman's life, from all the way in the past when he was Julian Kintobor, up until now as Eggman, who is a robotic from another universe that roboticized himself, then body hopped into a bunch of different robots, then became a fleshy man, and is now none of that in this new universe. I hope that you enjoyed this look into Eggman. And of course, if you enjoyed this, I would love to see a like, a subscribe, a comment, anything like that. It always makes my day to see that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you don't have to. I'm not your boss, and I just hope that you have a good one. So I 100% forgot to mention this, but a big thank you to Midori Natsume, who a year ago suggested this topic, and like literally it's been just spinning around in my head ever since then. I'm glad I finally got to it. Big thank you to Midori again.